My name is Doris Day. They called me America's sweetheart for 30 years. I said once, in my own book, in my own words, I'm tired of being thought of as Miss Goody Two-Shoes. I am not the all-American virgin queen. What I didn't say in that book, because I was still too angry to say it with the precision it deserved, was that while America was watching the virgin queen on screen, Marty Melcher was stealing every dollar she made. $20 million across 17 years. While I was on set being the girl next door, Marty was feeding my earnings into bankrupt hotels and worthless oil deals and a financial structure so deliberately complex that questioning it would have seemed ungracious. I trusted him. I was working. I knew nothing. And when Marty died, on April 20th, 1968, after 17 years of marriage, my son Terry took me walking through Beverly Hills and told me that the fortune I had been told to protect by staying in a marriage I had wanted to leave was gone. Not reduced, not mismanaged into a smaller number, gone. And I owed the IRS millions in back taxes besides. What I am going to give you now is the version of my life that does not appear in the fan magazines. Not the sweetheart, not the virgin, not the girl next door. The woman from Cincinnati who survived an abusive first husband named Al Jordan, a second marriage that lasted 8 months, 17 years of financial theft conducted by Marty Melcher and his lawyer Jerome Rosenthal, and a television show she never agreed to make that she had to perform for 5 seasons while simultaneously suing to recover what had been taken. The woman who won a $22.8 million judgment from a California court and received a fraction of it in installments, while Jerome Rosenthal was described by the lawyers who eventually disbarred him as too mean to die. That woman, in her own words, without the smile, without the song, without the image that was built around her while the theft was happening underneath it. Just the account, precise, clear, and 50 years overdue. Let me tell you who I was before the name, because the name was not mine, and the image was not mine, and by the time anyone bothered to ask who I actually was, the invented version had been in circulation for 20 years. I was born Doris Mary Ann Kappelhoff in Cincinnati, Ohio, the daughter of a German-American music teacher whose infidelity ended my parents' marriage when I was 12 years old, the daughter of a mother named Alma who took me to dance lessons and believed in me with the specific ferocity of a woman who had stopped believing in her husband. I was a dancer first. A car accident at 15 shattered my right leg, ended that, and while I was bedridden for 14 months singing along with the radio, I discovered that I could do something with my voice that required no legs at all. The band leader, Barney Rapp, who gave me my first job, was afraid my name was too long for a marquee. He heard me sing day after day and called me Doris Day. I acquiesced, though I was against artifice of any kind. I was Doris Kappelhoff from Cincinnati. But Doris Day was what they needed, and I learned early to give people what they needed while keeping what was actually mine somewhere they couldn't reach it. I kept that habit for the rest of my professional life. It served me well in most respects. In one respect, it was catastrophic. The habit of trusting other people's management of my external affairs, the career, the contracts, the finances, while I concentrated on the work itself, turned out to be the mechanism through which $20 million disappeared without my knowing it was gone. My first husband, Al Jordan, was pathologically jealous and physically abusive, beating me through my pregnancy with Terry, at one point holding me at gunpoint while he was driving. I was 18 years old. I had a son. I left. I went back to Cincinnati, left Terry with my mother Alma, and went back on the road with Les Brown's band because the road was the only thing available, and I was Doris Kappelhoff, and Doris Kappelhoff did not stop. Sentimental Journey became a hit in 1945. By 1948, I was in pictures. By 1950, I was America's sweetheart. And somewhere in the machinery of that ascent, Marty Melcher was watching and calculating and deciding that what I needed was a manager. What I actually needed was what I had always actually needed: a decent marriage and someone I could trust. What I got was Marty Melcher. And what happened next took 17 years to fully understand. What did Marty Melcher actually see when he looked at Doris Day? And what was he doing with the money while she was on set being America's Virgin Queen? That answer, when it arrived with a specific, devastating number attached to it. Marty was my agent before he was my husband. That is the order that matters. He understood the financial architecture of my career before he understood anything else about me. And by the time we married in 1951, he had already positioned himself as the person through whom all professional decisions passed. I want you to understand how complete that control was, because the word manager suggests a professional relationship with boundaries and oversight. What Marty Melcher built was something considerably more total than that. In 1956, Marty and his business partner Jerome Rosenthal, the lawyer who had handled my affairs since 1949, signed a retainer agreement giving Rosenthal 10% of everything the Melchers made. The court that eventually reviewed this agreement found that it made Rosenthal simultaneously my accountant, investment advisor, record keeper, and attorney, a quadruple role with no checks or balances of any kind, free of any oversight, in complete control of my financial affairs. The agreement was, the court said, short and deceptively simple. It did not spell out the ways in which Rosenthal would gain and I could lose. And Marty, the man who produced my films and managed my career and adopted Terry and told me I was his whole world, never adequately explained to me what I had agreed to. I was working. That is what I was doing while all of this was being constructed around me. I was working away, knowing nothing and trusting, I said afterward. The films came one after another, 39 pictures, more than 650 recorded songs, 4 consecutive years as the #1 female box office star in America, a record that has never been broken. The #1 female box office star of all time, not Elizabeth Taylor, not Greta Garbo, not Katharine Hepburn, Doris Day. And while Doris Day was on set being America's sweetheart, Marty Melcher and Jerome Rosenthal were taking that fortune and feeding it into shady gas and oil deals, bankrupt hotels, and land bank bond transactions that were, in the blunt assessment of the court that later examined them, worthless. Frank Sinatra, while making a picture with me in 1954, disliked Marty so much he had him banned from the set. My friends saw it. My colleagues saw it. In my 1975 autobiography, I wrote that I was shocked by how many people told me they had suspected Marty's business practices for years, and how many of them expressed regret that they had never warned me. They didn't warn me, and I didn't ask. Because I was Doris Kappelhoff from Cincinnati, the girl who had learned early to concentrate on the work and trust other people to manage what surrounded it. That habit had gotten me this far. I had no reason yet to understand that it was also the thing that was going to take everything. What I didn't know yet, what nobody told me, was that Marty had also discovered I wanted a divorce, and that what he said to stop me would keep me married to him, in name only, for years. Not because I loved him, because of a number he gave me that turned out to be a lie. In the early 1960s, I found out that Marty had been unfaithful. I wanted a divorce. I told him I wanted a divorce, and I meant it. And I was prepared to do what was necessary to end the marriage, because by that point, the marriage had been a business relationship for years, and I had no interest in maintaining even the pretense of it. What happened next is the part of this story that I think about most, when I think about how the theft was possible. Not the shady investments, not the worthless deals, not Jerome Rosenthal taking his 10% of everything. This moment, this specific conversation. Marty told me that dismantling what he called our financial empire would cost us a substantial portion of our fortune. He said the structures he had built, Arwen Productions, the music publishing companies, all of it, were so intertwined that separating them would destroy their value. And I believed him. I believed him because he was my manager and my husband and the man who had produced my films for a decade. And I had no specific, documentable reason to disbelieve him about the finances, because the finances were his domain entirely, and that was the arrangement we had agreed to. So Marty and I remained married, in name only, because of a fortune that, as it turned out, no longer existed. Think about that for a moment. Marty convinced me to stay married to protect a fortune he had already stolen. The leverage he used to keep me in that marriage was the threat of losing money that was already gone. I was being managed, controlled, contained, kept in place by the fiction of my own wealth. Every year I worked, every picture I made, every song I recorded, the money went into the machine, and Marty and Jerome Rosenthal processed it, and what came out the other side was nothing. Rosenthal borrowed and drained every dime against my music contract for compositions I had not even recorded yet. They were spending money I hadn't made yet, against work I hadn't done yet, while telling me the empire was intact and growing and worth protecting. The press called me Miss Chastity Belt, the world's oldest virgin. Comics made jokes about it. I said in my memoir, I have the unfortunate reputation of being Miss Goody Two-Shoes, America's virgin, and all that. So I'm afraid it's going to shock some people for me to say this, but I staunchly believe no two people should get married until they have lived together. What nobody was writing about, what nobody knew, was that the woman being mocked for her virginal image was living in a marriage that existed entirely on paper, staying married to a man she had tried to leave, trapped by a lie about money that was already gone. Marty Melcher died on April 20th, 1968, and the morning after he died, or close enough to it, my son Terry walked me through Beverly Hills and told me something that I was not prepared to hear. Something with a number in it. The number was not what I expected. Marty died on April 20th, 1968. We had been married 17 years. I was not well when he died. I want to say that plainly because it matters for what comes next. Because what came next required me to absorb something enormous at a moment when I had very little capacity to absorb anything at all. Terry took me walking through Beverly Hills. That is the image I carry from that period. The two of us walking, Terry beside me, explaining in the careful voice of someone who has been preparing for a difficult conversation that the financial situation was not what I had been told it was. Not what I had been told it was. That was the diplomatic version. What it actually was this. I was broke. I was $450,000 in debt. $20 million. The fortune accumulated across 2 decades of being the #1 female box office star in America, across 39 pictures and 650 songs, and 4 consecutive years at the top of every box office list ever compiled, was gone. Not reduced, not mismanaged into a smaller number. Gone. And not only was the fortune gone, Marty had also left me owing the IRS millions in unpaid back taxes. The empire he had convinced me to stay married to protect had not only ceased to exist, it had left a debt in my name that I was now responsible for paying. I said at the time, my husband thought Rosenthal was a genius. I was working away, knowing nothing and trusting. The court that eventually reviewed the case found that Jerome Rosenthal had been in complete control of my financial affairs, free of any checks and balances, extracting fees from me and Marty simultaneously, providing investment advice that was a complete and utter failure, maintaining what the court called an indentured position over my finances since 1956. Indentured. That was the word the court used. While I was being called America's sweetheart, I was financially indentured to Jerome Rosenthal. A man I had never fully understood had that kind of power over me. And then, and this is the part that still takes my breath away when I think about it, I found out about the television show. Marty had signed my name to a contract committing me to star in a weekly CBS television series. Without telling me, without asking me. He had signed my name, collected an advance for the production, spent the advance, and died, leaving me with a contract I had not agreed to for a show I had not been consulted about that I was now legally obligated to make. It was awful. I was really, really not very well when Marty passed away, and the thought of going into TV was overpowering. But he'd signed me up for a series. 6 weeks. That was how much notice I had before cameras were supposed to roll on the Doris Day Show. 6 weeks, no money, $500,000 in debt, owing the IRS, and a television contract I had never signed. I had 2 choices. I could fight the contract, which would take years and money I didn't have, or I could show up. I showed up. But I also did something else simultaneously. I found a lawyer, a different kind of lawyer, and I told him everything. What happened in the courtroom that followed was 99 days long and produced a number that I want you to hold in your mind before I tell you whether I ever actually saw it. I sued Jerome Rosenthal. I want to say that simply and directly because the act of suing, of a woman in 1969 taking a powerful Beverly Hills lawyer to court over the management of her own money, was not a simple or obvious thing to do, and I want you to understand the weight of the decision. Rosenthal had been in business for decades. He had connections throughout the industry. He had resources I did not have, including the specific resource of being willing to delay, obstruct, appeal, and maneuver through a legal system he understood far better than I did. Rosenthal was described by one of the disciplined prosecutors who eventually pursued him as the man who was too mean to die. That description was earned over 20 years of watching him work. I filed suit in 1969. I did not receive a settlement until 1979. 10 years. A decade of litigation, while I was simultaneously making a television show I had not agreed to make, paying off debts I had not agreed to incur, and performing the role of America's sweetheart for a public that had no idea any of this was happening. The trial itself lasted 99 days. 99 days of testimony about shady gas and oil deals, bankrupt hotels, worthless land bank bond transactions, a retainer agreement that gave Jerome Rosenthal complete control of my financial life without my informed consent. The judge found that Rosenthal had never adequately informed me of the terms, conditions, and implications of the agreements I had signed. That the agreements were short and deceptively simple. That they did not spell out any of the ways in which Rosenthal would gain and I could lose. The court found fraud. The court found malpractice. The judge awarded me $22.8 million. $22.8 million? That was the number the court assigned to what Jerome Rosenthal and Marty Melcher had taken. A judge had sat through 99 days of evidence and concluded that the correct figure for what had been stolen from Doris Day was $22.8 million. The newspapers covered it. Doris Day wins $22.8 million lawsuit, the headline said. It was the largest judgment of its kind in California at that time. And then I want to tell you what happened next, because what happened next is the part the headlines did not cover with the same enthusiasm. Rosenthal declared bankruptcy. The judgment that the court had spent 99 days arriving at was, for practical purposes, uncollectible. Terry told the New York Times that I eventually received a partial payment from an insurance company, nowhere near the amount the judge had allocated. Some reports indicate a settlement of $6 million, paid in 23 annual installments. 23 annual installments. The court said $22.8 million. I received, across decades of payments, a fraction. Jerome Rosenthal was eventually disbarred by the California Supreme Court in 1987, nearly 20 years after I filed my complaint, much of the delay caused by his own delaying tactics. He outlasted the patience of everyone who tried to hold him accountable. Men who steal from women usually are very good at that. What I had to do in the meantime, while the lawsuit wound through the courts for a decade, was work. Work I had not agreed to. In a role that was, in its own specific way, the final cruelty of what Marty Melcher had arranged for me. The Doris Day Show ran for 5 seasons. From 1968 to 1973, every week, I showed up on a CBS soundstage and performed a version of Doris Day for an American television audience that had no idea the woman they were watching was simultaneously fighting a decade-long lawsuit against Jerome Rosenthal, paying off debts Marty Melcher hadn't told her about, and working under a contract she had never signed. The irony was not lost on me. The show that Marty had committed me to without my knowledge, using my name, collecting an advance on my behalf, spending that advance before he died, was the show that kept me solvent enough to survive the legal battle to recover what he had taken. Marty had stolen my money and then arranged, from beyond the grave, the mechanism by which I would earn enough to keep going while I fought to get it back. The first season was set on a ranch. My character was a widow named Doris Martin, whose late husband had left her with a great deal to be responsible for. Life imitating art, or art imitating life, Marty had died in 1968, leaving me a widow whose late husband had left her with a lot to be responsible for. The audience thought they were watching a warm family comedy about a cheerful widow on a California ranch. In 1973, the Doris Day Show ended, and I made a decision that Hollywood did not understand, and the press did not understand, and that I want to explain now with the clarity of someone who has had 50 years to think about it. I retired. Not from exhaustion, not from failure, not because the offers stopped coming. They didn't stop. They kept coming for years, roles and concert tours and television specials, and all the apparatus of a career that was still, by any measurable standard, viable. I retired because, for the first time since I was 15 years old, singing along with the radio in a Cincinnati bedroom with a broken leg, I had the option of choosing what came next entirely by myself. No father, no Al Jordan, no saxophonist I had married against my better judgment, no Marty Melcher. Just me and the question of what Doris Kappelhoff actually wanted. What she wanted was animals. I want to say that without apology and without the slight embarrassment that tends to creep into accounts of my later life when the subject comes up. It was not a withdrawal from the world. It was the first fully autonomous decision of my professional life, and I made it with complete intention. A friend said, "I just think the disappointment she's had in marriages is what turned her off of people and turned her to animals, and they never disappoint you." That is accurate as far as it goes. What it doesn't capture is the specific relief of devoting your energy to something that does not have a financial interest in your career, that cannot sign your name to a contract, that cannot drain your bank account while you are on set being America's sweetheart. The Doris Day Animal Foundation, the Doris Day Animal League, decades of work on behalf of creatures who needed advocacy and had no mechanism to provide it for themselves, which was a situation I understood from the inside, with a specificity that no amount of abstract compassion could have produced. I knew what it felt like to have your resources managed by someone else. I knew what it felt like to trust Martin Melcher and Jerome Rosenthal with the wrong kind of power. I knew what it felt like to discover, too late, that the protections you believed were in place had never existed. The animals could not discover those things and advocate for themselves. I could advocate for them. I did. For the rest of my life, that was the work. The Academy offered me an honorary Oscar multiple times. I declined each time. I received a Grammy for Lifetime Achievement in 2008 and was not present at the ceremony. I turned 97 in 2019, having spent years telling everyone I was born in 1924 when I was actually born in 1922, which was a small private joke I enjoyed at the expense of an industry that had always preferred its women younger than they actually were. The Associated Press found my real birth certificate, and I released a statement saying, "Age is just a number." It is. I had been proving that for decades. And what came after the numbers? After the 20 million stolen? After the 22.8 awarded? After the fraction received from Rosenthal's insurers in installments? Was mine. Entirely, finally, irrevocably mine. What I have not yet told you is the thing I said in my own memoir that summarizes the entire architecture of what was built around Doris Day while Doris Kappelhoff was inside it, working. One sentence. I said it in 1976. It is the most precise thing I ever said about my own life, and it is where this story ends. The sentence I said in 1976 was this: "There must be something about me, about whatever it is that I give off, that accounts for this disparity between who I am and who I appear to be." I want to stay with that sentence for a moment before we finish, because it is the most honest thing I ever said in public. And it is the thing that the entire machinery of the Doris Day image was built to prevent anyone from examining too closely. The disparity between who I was and who I appeared to be. That disparity was not an accident. It was a product. It was manufactured, maintained, and profited from by every structure that surrounded me: the studio system, the management contract, the retainer agreement that gave Jerome Rosenthal complete control of my financial life, the husband who convinced me to stay married to protect a fortune he had already spent. Here is the true, honest story. I was Doris Kappelhoff from Cincinnati. My father's infidelity broke my family when I was 12. A car accident ended my dancing career at 15. Al Jordan beat me through my pregnancy with Terry and held me at gunpoint in a moving car. My second marriage lasted 8 months and left me in a depression so severe I could barely function. Marty Melcher spent 17 years stealing $20 million from me while I made 39 pictures and 650 songs and was the #1 female box office star in America. Jerome Rosenthal helped him do it, and then declared bankruptcy when the court told him to give it back. I found out I was broke the week after Marty died. I made 128 television episodes I had not agreed to make to pay off debts I had not agreed to incur. I sued and won $22.8 million and received a fraction of it in annual installments. That is the true, honest story. That is who Doris Day actually was. And now I want to tell you what I want you to take from it. Not the theft. The theft is documented, litigated, settled, finished. Not the image. The image is dissolving even as I speak, replaced by the account you now have. What I want you to take is the mechanism, the specific, replicable, entirely ordinary mechanism by which a woman at the peak of her professional power was kept from understanding what was being done with what she earned. It required no violence. It required only a management structure complex enough that questioning it seemed ungrateful, a husband patient enough to construct it over years, and a woman disciplined enough in her work that she trusted Marty Melcher and Jerome Rosenthal to handle everything else. She was the #1 female box office star of all time, the only one who was #1 for 4 consecutive years, and she did not have full independent control of her own bank account for most of her professional life. Both of those things were true simultaneously. The disparity between who she was and who she appeared to be was not a mystery. It was the product. She was the product. And the product had no idea what it was worth, because the people who knew had arranged it so she would never need to find out. Until the morning Terry walked her through Beverly Hills and told her the number. And the number was not what she expected. It was worse. So now you have the number, $20 million, stolen across 17 years by Marty Melcher and Jerome Rosenthal, a man who produced my pictures and adopted my son, and told me that the reason I couldn't leave the marriage was that it would cost us a substantial portion of our fortune, the fortune that was already gone. Marty used the lie of my own wealth to keep me in a marriage I had tried to exit, and then he died and left me with the debt and the IRS bill and the unsigned television contract and the specific task of rebuilding from nothing at 46 years old, while the lawsuit wound through the courts for a decade. I want to ask you something before you go. I was the #1 female box office star in America for 4 consecutive years. That record has never been broken. I made 39 pictures and recorded more than 650 songs. I was on the cover of every magazine, paired with every major leading man, the face of an era that America looks back on with uncomplicated nostalgia. The bright-eyed sweetheart of the 1950s, wholesome as home-baked bread, the pristine girl next door. And I did not have full, independent control of my own bank account for most of my professional life. Both of those things were true at the same time. I want you to sit with that arithmetic for a moment. The most successful woman in American cinema during the most celebrated decade of American cinema did not know what was in her own accounts. Not because she was naive, because the system that Marty Melcher and Jerome Rosenthal built around her was designed so she would never need to find out. The lawsuit was settled. Jerome Rosenthal was disbarred. The Doris Day Show ran 5 seasons. The animals never disappointed me. I turned 97 on April 3rd, 2019, which was 2 years older than anyone knew because I had spent decades telling people I was born in 1924, when the certificate said 1922. The Associated Press found my real birth certificate, and I said, "Age is just a number," and I meant it, because I had spent my entire life being told what number I was supposed to be. Young enough, wholesome enough, virginal enough, profitable enough. And I was done with other people's numbers. My number was 97. My estate was $7.4 million, left entirely to the animals. Marty Melcher is a footnote. Jerome Rosenthal is a disbarment ruling. I am Doris Day. And the account, as you now have it, is finally accurate.